All right, welcome everyone. Holding by book of Leviticus. Again, I want to welcome everyone. Holding by the book of Leviticus, chapter 16. Actually, starting a new chapter over here. New parsha. Parsha's Aharon. After the death of the two sons of Aharon. Right, we spoke last week the connection between the end of last week's parsha. At the end of the previous chapter and the connection, right? The person has discharge, etc., whether a man, female, whatever it is, and the connection to the death of the two sons of Aharon. So we are holding by book of Leviticus chapter 16, verse 1. And the Torah tells me, V'daber Hashem el Moshe, Acharei Moshe b'nei Aharon, v'karvosom lifnei Hashem v'yamus. Now the Torah says that God spoke to Moshe after the death of the two sons of Aaron's two sons, when they approached before Hashem and they died. Right, so we're going to see in the next verse, seemingly they went into a place, i.e. the Holy of Holies, when they weren't allowed to. And God took them. So we saw last week there were 6 different reasons, potentially, that the rabbis give why the sons of Aaron died. Right? There are about 6 different reasons. And so we're going to have to see. Right? We're going to have to see how this, how all this works over here. What seemingly the reason is and what's really going on. Because we mentioned last week that one reason is they went into the Mishkan an impurity, to liable for a death penalty for that. It's goes into the temple and impurity. They brought a strange fire. That seems to be a simple explanation, like we saw way back when. The book of Leviticus, I think chapter 10. We saw over there they drank wine, not allowed to drink wine and serve in the temple, or they gave over Jewish law in front of their master, in front of the rabbi. Seemingly, they didn't get married. That was the 5th reason. And they got too close to the mountain when God gave the Torah. Right? So there was a command not to get too close. Seemingly they got too close, and that was the reason. So potentially 6 reasons. Right? 6 reasons over here. What does the Torah tell me? The Torah tells me God speaks to Moshe after his death, after the death of Aaron's two sons, when they approached before Hashem. Now we're going to have to see, right? What the possible reason is. I mean, there are a number of different reasons. But what does he say over here? What does the Torah say? So the Torah seems to say over here that God takes them. Torah doesn't say why, but, again, if we go back to chapter 10, I think it's chapter 10. Let me just see. Yeah, at the beginning of chapter 10, it says, sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, took his fire pan, verse 1, chapter 10, verse 1, put fire in them, placed incense upon them. They brought before Hashem an alien fire. Brought a strange fire that God did not command them. And verse 2, fire came forth before God and consumed them. And they died before God. Now, go a little bit later in that chapter, and we see in verse 8, chapter 10, verse 8, Hashem spoke to Aaron saying, do not drink intoxicating wine, you and your sons with you. When you come to the tent of meeting, that you shall not die. It's eternal decree for all generations. Right? So either they brought a strange fire, or they drank wine before they served. So there are a number of reasons, number of potential reasons here. Now, Rashi really seemed to already deal with them back then in chapter 10. So to go back and go through classes where we spoke about it there. Rashi's going to go on to a different thing. He's going to go on a different thing over here. Right? Because again, the Torah tells me they approached God and they died. Comes on Rashi and says, first thing is that Hashem spoke to Moshe after the death of Aaron's two sons. So why did the Torah say this? Right? Why did the Torah say this? So according to one of the commentaries here, is we don't know what's said in the first statement. Right? That's the way it seems like in Torah's Kahanim and the Medrash. Right? Why did the Torah say it? Because it says Hashem spoke to Moshe, but it doesn't say what he said. It just said he spoke to him. When they approached before Hashem and they died. Right? After the death of Aaron's two sons. So what did he say? Comes on Rashi and says, why did the Torah tell me this? Torah doesn't give me an explanation over here. Doesn't say anything. Just says, God spoke to Moshe after the death of Aaron's two sons. Very nice. So what did he say? So you tell me, okay, it's the next verse. Right? He says, you may not come at all times to sanctuary. Okay. But why didn't you just make it a continuous statement here? Why not just make it one whole thing? Right? So Rashi says, in the name of the Tana, Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah, Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah became the Nasi, the exilarch, for lack of a better word, of the Jewish people. And really, when he took over, he was 18. Rav Shimon Gamliel was the exilarch before him, and he sort of got demoted, as the Mishnah Rosh Hashanah seems to say that he was too harsh. Seemed to be too harsh, and he got knocked off. He got knocked down. So Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah was the next exilarch, so to speak, and he was only 18. Right? So in the Haggadah Passover, it says that, I'm a man of 70 years, or I'm young like 70 years. Right? Now the question is, the Haggadah there, one explanation is that really he was 18. Right? He said, I'm a person like 70, but he wasn't 70. Right? When did he become the Nasi? When he was 18. He was 18. So a miracle happened, and then God changed his beard. His beard became white. So people would have more respect, even though he was much younger. Right? But at the same time, he says, I'm like a person of 70. Why 70? Right? So one of the commentaries it mentions, we understand, as we saw before, Eliezer ben Azariah was 18. He was 18 when he became the Nasi. So why does it say it's like 70? Right? Because who's the reincarnation of Shmuel Navi? Samuel the prophet. So if he says it's like 70, how old was Samuel the prophet when he died? 52. Right? 52 and 18 is 70. Interesting enough. Just a side point over here. Says Rashi over here. Says the Tana Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah. Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah explains, right? He explains with a parable. He explains with a parable. What's the parable? So says Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah. It can compare to be a sick person to whom a doctor enters to treat. Well, the person's sick, so he goes to the doctor comes to him to treat him. What does the doctor say? The doctor tells him, don't eat cold food. And don't lie in a damp, chilly place. Right? Why not? Because you get sick. So he gives him advice. Right? He tells him, don't eat cold food, and don't lie in a damn chilly place. Okay. Comes another doctor. Another doctor comes along. What does the doctor say? Doctor says, don't eat cold food. Don't lie in a damp, chilly place. Same thing. Previous doctor said, except for one difference. The one difference is, what does he add? And he says, don't lie in a damp, chilly place so that you will not die the way so-and-so died. In other words, first doctor says, don't eat cold food, don't lie in a damp, chilly place. Second doctor says the same thing, except he emphasizes the fact that you don't want to do that because so-and-so died that way. He died the same way. So comes on the second doctor, and the second doctor rouses him to follow his instructions. Certainly more than the first. In other words, the first one says what? First one says don't eat cold food, don't lie in a damp, chilly place. Okay? Second one says the same thing, except he adds on, don't do that because so-and-so died. That's why so-and-so died. Obviously more stringent over here. So you're going to say, very nice. So what does that have to do with what Rashi said before? Right? We're talking what the Torah said. Because this is why Rashi says, this is why he says after the death of Aharon's two sons. That what? That Hashem said to Moshe, speak to Aharon, your brother. He's not allowed to come anytime he wants. That's the next verse. Don't come at all times into the sanctuary, within the curtain, in front of the cover, etc. Right? When the cloud is there, because you'll die if you do such a thing. Right? So God says to Moshe, speak to Aharon, your brother, and say to him, don't come anytime you want, so you don't die the way your sons died. Right? So what do we see? What does the Torah tell me? The Torah says God spoke to Moshe after the death of Aaron's two sons. Right? And they died. So the parable is, one person goes to one doctor. Doctor tells him something. Second doctor says the same thing, but he says, do this or don't do this because that's the way so-and-so died. So that's the second verse over here. Because in the second verse it says, speak to Aharon, your brother, saying, don't come anytime you want so you don't die. Right? Emphasis. More emphasis over here. Right? The fact that you don't want to do X thing. Because if you do X thing, you'll die. Right? Moshe also drew upon the example of Nadav and Avihu in order that Aaron's going to be careful when it has to do with sanctity of the Mishkan. That's the idea of Rashi says. That's the parable. Right? That's the parable, and that's why the Torah says the way it does over here. Right? So explains Rashi. Now, comes on the Ramban. Comes on the Ramban over here. And the Ramban says, once his sons die, right? There's already a warning. There's already a warning, as we saw in the book of Leviticus, chapter 10, verses 8 and 9. Don't drink wine. Don't drink booze. Right? Don't drink schnapps, whiskey, scotch. Right? When you're serving in the temple. Because if you do that, you'll die. That's what the Torah tells me clear. Torah also tells me, before that, in chapter 10, the very beginning, also don't bring a strange fire you're not allowed to bring. Right? So here, so that's what the Ramban says. That Moshe Rabbeinu says clear as well. He warns him, don't draw too close. At times, you're not allowed to draw too close. Why not? Because you'll die. Seemingly, you'll die. So what do we see? Right, so says the Ramban, you got these two commands. These two commands, right? On the next day is why they die. Seemingly, that's why they die. And now, Aaron himself, his sons die. His sons die over here. Now, Aaron himself is an Onet. Now, what is an onain? An onain is someone that dies that we have an obligation to mourn for. Right? A Jew has an obligation to mourn for. Mother, father, sister, brother, God forbid a child or a spouse. Now, an onain means that a person's in sort of limbo. He's in a limbo status. What do I mean? That means that the person who's supposed to be buried is not buried yet. For whatever reason, he hasn't been buried yet. So the one who's obligated to mourn for such a person is called an onain. That's his status. His status is can't make blessings. Right? There are many things he can't do over here. Can't make blessings, can't pray. Right? He's exempt from doing any mitzvahs until this person's buried. Right? Until this loved one is buried. Now, what would happen? What would happen if, God forbid, we'll just throw this out there. Let's say they delay the person being buried. They delay the person being buried for whatever reason. So until that person is buried, so you don't make any blessings. There are no blessings to be made because this comes first. You got to bury the person. There are other circumstances where the person not being buried. Let's say, and I'm not saying this is necessarily permitted, but let's say they delay the burial because someone from out of town needs to get there. And they're only going to get there hours later, or even potentially the next day. See, here in Israel, that would never happen. Jerusalem would never happen. Why? Because there's a custom here in Jerusalem. Somebody dies, you bury him that same day. You don't wait. I remember going to a funeral, somebody passed away that we knew. They passed away like 6, 7 o'clock at night. So I figured, the funeral is going to be, sometime the next day, probably, early morning or whatever it was. They buried him that night. That night was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I remember because I went. It's really crazy trying to find the place, whatever the whole thing. But they buried him at night, right in the middle of the night. Right? So the custom in Israel is you don't wait. Right? So let's say better. Custom in Jerusalem is you don't wait. Within 24 hours, the person's buried. Right? Now that could be with, have to do with judgment and other things. Right? But I will mention one thing. Just on this topic. And that is that you can have, when a person, God forbid, dies, the soul tremendously in flux. Soul doesn't know what to do. The soul hovers around the places that it knows. So a lot of times before the soul goes up to get judged, right, what happens? Where a person sits shiva, right, where they sit and mourn for the person that died, that soul can be there. It can be in other places, but that soul can be there. Can hear what's going on. It's just no one can see it. No one can, no one hears anything, that the soul says or whatever. So the soul doesn't really know what to do. Soul, like I said, is in a state of, we'll say a state of flux to a certain extent. So that being the case, the most important thing for that soul is that the body goes in the ground. For a Jew, applies to a Jew. Body should go in the ground. Obligation. I shouldn't say should. It's an obligation. Because the Torah says you're created from the dust, you go back to the dust. Now, why is that? Very simple. Adam and Eve ate from the tree. So now God had to throw them out of the Garden of Eden. Why? Because God's afraid they're going to eat from the tree of life. Fame, right? They're going to live forever. No, can't live forever. Why can't a person live forever? Because death is an atonement. Right? It's considered an atonement. Doesn't mean full atonement. But it's a partial atonement over here. Now, since a person sins, there's no one been in this world where it hasn't sinned. Only a handful of individuals that have been, that died only because of the sin of the snake and eating from the tree of knowledge. But everyone dies because of sin. So death really never should have been, right? It's not a Jewish concept. Death is, plan B, plan C. Right, I'll say plan B, it's easy. Right? Why is it plan B? Because that's what God wanted. But he gave man free will. Man had the ability to do the right thing and do the wrong thing. Right? Man chose to do the wrong thing for whatever reason we're not going to get into. But man chose to do the wrong thing. So the repercussions. So now they have to get atonement. How does mankind get atonement? They have to go through the death process. Body has to disintegrate. The soul goes up. The soul gets judged for what it did in this world. Now, part of that process, remember who brought death to the world? Adam and Eve. So when a person dies, first person they see is who? Is Adam. Right? It's all brought down somewhere. I don't remember where. And that the soul tells Adam, this is the reason I have to go through this process. He nods as part of his atonement process. In other words, every single person has to go past him. Their soul goes past him. And he nods. And that's part of his atonement process. Because the reality is never should have happened. Death never should have happened. Had Adam and Eve done what they should have done, they would have gone into the Garden of Eden, gone into paradise. That's it. End of the world. Purpose of creation done. But obviously it's not what happened. So that being said, so God is going to plan B. Right? What is plan B? He had to bring death to the world. So because he had to bring death to the world, then part of the atonement process for the soul is to go through the death process. So God has to take them out of the Garden of Eden. He has to take them out of the Garden of Eden because what's he worried about? They're going to eat from the tree of life. Can't live forever. Because if you live forever, you don't get atonement. So death is part of atonement. Right? Does it atone for everything? No. Doesn't atone for everything. Certainly helps. No question. But, okay, when a person dies, they die. And then they're going to have to answer for what they've done. In this world as well. So here, what do we have? So I mentioned that because the Ramban here says, on this day, when the Mishkan's going up, tabernacle's going up, they die. They die afterwards. Now, at this point, Aaron the Kohen has the status of what we call an Oning. He's an Oning. Right? In other words, can't make blessings, can't serve in the Mishkan, can't serve in the temple. Right? Mitzvahs he can't do because they're not buried. Their life is taken away from them, but they're not buried. Right? So he's got the status of an Oning. And says the Ramban, not only that, but God's presence, whatever this means, will not go on a person if they're sad. In other words, you won't have prophecy. Even though there's no prophecy today except by little children and imbeciles, right? We don't have prophecy today. The lowest form of prophecy is Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, right? There are very few people in the generation that have such a thing. But that's the lowest form of prophecy. In any case, this prophecy, Aaron's not going to have, and no one's going to have if they're sad. Right? They're not going to have it if they're sad. In other words, God is not going to put his countenance on him or on a person if they're sad. That's the first thing. Second thing is, there's a warning about drinking wine. Right? We saw, as we mentioned, that chapter 10, verse 8 and 9, not allowed to drink wine served in the temple. That you're not allowed to do. Right? So you get the warning against wine. And there's a warning over here. The first thing that Aharon is told on that day is also what Moshe told him. Right? You're not allowed to drink wine, not allowed to serve whenever you want. Not allowed to go into the Holy of Holies whenever you want, only once a year. What's once a year? Meaning on Yom Kippur. Right? But so, why does it mention this over here? Why does it mention this warning about wine? So he says, there comes along the warning over here to warn the Jewish people you shouldn't die in your impurity. In other words, you want to come to the Mishkan, right? A Kohen has to serve in the Mishkan. In the tabernacle, can't be impure. Punishment is, if he's impure, He walks into the temple, walks into the Mishkan. Death penalty, right? Not allowed. So first you get the warning of that about impurity. Then you get the other warning. Then you get the other warning over here. That's the first thing, right? That's the first thing Ramban mentions. And says the Ramban further. He says the entire Torah goes according to order. Now, not everyone agrees with that. There were certain things written in the Torah. Rashi says a number of times. He says, "Ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah." There's no earlier or later in the Torah, meaning things were written down when he wrote them down. It doesn't necessarily mean it was written in chronological order. Right? Then things weren't written down exactly when they happened. Right? First proof we could say very clear. I mean, there are other proofs also. First one comes to mind by the sin of the golden calf. Right? What happened by the sin of the golden calf? So you got the Erev of the mixed multitude. Converts came out of Egypt or other places. They come be part of the Jewish people. And they make this golden calf. It ate, it spoke. Moshe Rabbeinu got delayed. According to them, got delayed. They made a mistake in the calculation. So they worship this calf. That's what it sounds like. But if you look in the book of Exodus, that should have happened in Parshas Mishpatim. Parshas Mishpatim, after the Torah is given, goes through all these laws of damage. Many, many laws of damage. I think it's the single biggest Torah portion of mitzvahs that are given, right? In one Torah portion. But you don't see the golden calf written there. You don't see it in a number of chapters. You're going to say, what happened? Where'd it go? It happened before. You're right. Even though it happened before, it doesn't necessarily mean that Torah is written in chronological order. Doesn't mean that. It's not a contradiction. Right? Not a contradiction. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu did not necessarily write things in chronological order. Right? Rashi says that a number of times. Right? He says that a number of times. Now, comes on the Ramban. Now, why do I mention that? Because the Ramban here says, according to me, all the Torah is keseder, written in order. It's orderly. Meaning that he says that all the places that, let's say that something is written that really is written later, but it really happened before, right? And he gives an example. God says, chapter 25, verse 1, book of Leviticus, God says, by the Ber Hashem al Moshe Bar Sinai. Right? Chapter 25, let's just see, quotes it right. Sure it does. Doesn't need me to agree. But what does the Torah here say? Chapter 25, verse 1. We'll get there one day. But the Ber Hashem al Moshe Bar Sinai Lemor. Exactly what the Ramban says. What does the Torah say? God spoke on Mount Sinai. Right? It says, speak to the Jewish people. Right? And they're going to get the land that I promised to them. And there's going to be a sabbatical year. Right? It's going to be a Shemitah. Right? A sabbatical year like we're living now in the land of Israel. Now, what's the point? So says the Ramban, okay, I'm going to give that as an example. God spoke on Mount Sinai. In this book also, for example, God says, and further in the book of Numbers, chapter 7, verse 1, it says on that day where Moshe finished putting up the Mishkan. What do you mean on that day? Should have been a lot earlier. Seemingly a lot earlier. So God also spoke on Mount Sinai. Right? Now, if God, so we're going to say God spoke on Mount Sinai more than once. Right? It's all one thing. God spoke. What did God really speak? As we understand, God gave 10 commandments. Right? That's what he spoke to the entire Jewish nation, which no one makes such a claim except us. So God spoke to the entire Jewish nation. So some of the commentaries say, first 2 of the commandments everybody heard, and then they died, God brought them back to life. Others say they were all 10 commandments. Right? But the reality is God gave the entire Torah. right? He gave the entire Torah to Moshe. Moshe passed it down. But again, we have different places. The whole point here is we have different places in the Torah that says God spoke of Mount Sinai. God spoke of Mount Sinai. Right? But it happened at a different time. The event that we're talking about later, Book of Numbers, what's the command that God gave over there? Was the command of the sabbatical year. He gave the command of the sabbatical year. Well, don't you think the command of the sabbatical year was earlier? Seemingly it's earlier. Right? Not only that, what do we have? We have as well the building of the Mishkan, putting up the Mishkan. Well, didn't that happen well before? Seemingly happened before. Right? In other words, I could have events that are brought in later, commands that are brought in later, but the reality is it was before. That's not a contradiction. Right? Seemingly not a contradiction. Because you say, well, it's in order. Yeah. And we always have to think, and we always have to understand what the connection between the verses are. Right? In other words, what we call in the Hebrew vernacular, we would call it smuchim, right? Things that, one verse is connected to the verse before. So we don't, Rashi, other commentaries will tell you what the connection is, because sometimes the connection is not clear. Give an example. Right? At the end of the book of Exodus, what does the Torah tell me? It's all about the building of the Mishkan. Right? Chapter after chapter. It's all about the boards, the loops, the clasps, the altars, everything. Talks about the building of the Mishkan, building the tabernacle. Then there's a verse. That says you got to keep Shabbos. Right? My kasher. What's the connection? What in the world's the connection? So Rashi says on the spot that anything that was done in the Mishkan, any work that was done in the tabernacle, it does not supersede Shabbos. Now, you're going to say, oh, Rashi's adding to the Torah. How does Rashi know that? Where does Rashi know that from? Because there's a fundamental question. The verse about Shabbos, I already know. It's given in the Ten Commandments. It's given before the Ten Commandments. A number of commands in the desert. Right? And it's given over there also. So what does it have to do with the building of the Mishkan? Building the tabernacle. Now, Karaites, we'll make fun of the Karaites here. It's always fun to make fun of them, right? They don't believe in oral law. Now, if they don't believe in oral law, so what do they do with that verse? They got a problem with that verse. Verse doesn't make a whole lot of sense where it is. So they're going to have to come up with their own explanation. They're going to have to come up with their own explanation. They can't say, well, it's just out of order. Why is it out of order? It really should have been put with the other verses on Shabbos. Very good. So that makes the question stronger. So what's it doing there? So what it's doing there seemingly out of place. Give another example. Right? If you look at Leviticus chapter 18, we'll get there one day. We read 21 verses on Yom Kippur. We read from the Torah Mincha of Yom Kippur. Right, the afternoon service of Yom Kippur, what do we read about? Immorality. We read about immorality, forbidden relationships. Now, way back when, first video I ever did on Tanakh Talk was on homosexuality. And someone tried to rip me to shreds and say, come on, you're saying it's forbidden based on all the other verses before, because all the other verses talk about immorality, which is true, forbidden relationships. But if you look at a verse before, what does it speak about? Sorcery. So then now someone's going to use this idea and say, look, there's a connection between the verses, right? So if I have 20 verses all about immorality, and I got one verse telling me right after or before this verse, telling me that it's forbidden to do sorcery, well, there's a connection. So this person said, well, you know what the connection is? The connection is it must be homosexuality is only forbidden when it comes to sorcery or when it comes to idolatry. That's when they did it. So that's only when it applies. But if there's no idolatry, it should be okay. Now, I would say that verse needs to be explained 100%. Right? That verse seems totally out of place. The verse about sorcery. But I would say if 93% or 94% of those verses, right? 20 verses out of 21 or 21 out of 22, whatever it is, speak about immorality. And I got one verse that talks about sorcery. How in the world can you tell me that's the main thing and that's what I'm learning from? Again, I'm not disagreeing that that verse needs to be explained because it's seemingly totally out of place. I agree. But you can't negate 20, 22 other verses, 21 other verses and say, I'm just going to throw them out. That has nothing to do with anything. This verse on sorcery, that's what it's all about. You got to get big shoulders to say such a thing. Right? But if you have the majority of verses talking about one thing, you would think by logic, pure logic. That's what it's talking about, immorality. Why in the world are you going to tell me it's talking about only, it's only talking about that juxtaposition verse about sorcery. Right? So we're going to have to come up with an explanation why. Right? 100%. We're going to have to explain it. Right? But that verse could be there for any number of reasons. Could be there any number of reasons. But weren't verses before spoke about sorcery? Sure. They're interdispersed. We can say the same thing by idolatry. Many, many times, Torah tells me, can't intermarry. Right? 100%. You can't intermarry. Right? So it says it a whole bunch of times. Right? So what do you think? God was kidding? Even it was written by man? No, it's only that generation. No, it's only this. It doesn't apply to. Where do you see such a thing? Right? There are things that God hates, that God despises. One of them is immorality, and we see that a lot. The Torah speaks about. Second thing is idolatry. It speaks a lot about stealing, a lot of things, right? But the more the Torah speaks about a particular thing, it means there's a tremendous emphasis on that. It's something to stay away from totally, right? 100%, right? To stay away from. So I could see, okay, maybe someone will say it was put in there for extra emphasis. Maybe. Right? We see the Ten Commandments, a number of them have to do with idolatry. But we see idolatry brought in a number of places. Don't bring in abomination to your house. What's that talking about? Idolatry. Right? Interesting question that applied to non-Jews. Certainly applies to a Jew. Can't bring an idol into his house. Right? Seemingly it should apply to a non-Jew as well. But regardless, if there are things mentioned more than once, it's emphasis. Because something, that the Jewish people have to know. And they have to have it ingrained in their heads. Even if you tell me, come on, how potent is idolatry today? There was a discussion the Talmud brings out, just throw this out there. The discussion between Rav Ashi, who was one of the redactors of the Talmud, helped put the Talmud together, and Achav, evil King Achav. And Achav came to him and he asked him certain halachic questions that Rav Ashi couldn't answer. And he couldn't answer. Achav was no slouch. Definitely no slouch. So Rav Ashi asked him, if you're such a big Talmud Chacham, if you're such a big rabbinic scholar, how in the world could you have gone after idolatry? How could you have gone after idolatry? That doesn't make any sense. So Achav answered him. The Talmud says, if you would have been in my generation, if you would have lived in my generation, you would have been running after its coattails. That's how powerful it was. Right? They made a mistake. Right? The Rambam explained beginning of the laws of idolatry. Just like Pharaoh and others thought God was too powerful, didn't want to have anything to do with this world, to let other things, other powers run the world. And God's busy doing other things. What does it deal with us? What are they going to deal with man? You got other things to deal with, black holes, who knows what. He's busy keeping the world going. So he gave other powers the right to take over the world. Well, that's a problem. The major problem, and that's heresy 101. Why? Because as brought down in Kabbalah, these things do not have force by themselves. The wind cannot huff and puff if God says you ain't doing nothing. They don't have independent power. Right? Winds, fire, these things don't have independent power. They only have power because God wields it. And if God wants to stir everything up, make a hurricane, right? Or make an earthquake in the Atlantic Ocean, make a tsunami, destroy half of Southeast Asia, put Atlas back on the map, no pun intended. God can do that if he desires, for whatever reason. And if not, then in the Atlantic Ocean says, well, this is what I'm going to do. God, you don't have to say. God's going to say, I don't think so. You don't have independent power. These things do not have independent power. Right? Okay. So, we don't understand when we see these things as what we'll call a quote unquote natural disaster. We don't believe in natural disasters. Everything comes from God. So it's very hard to understand, when things happen, when, there'll be a number of things, that happen that, there could be an earthquake. There could be a tsunami. There could be a hurricane, cause a lot of damage, could cause death. Could cause death. You're going to say, come on, all these people, the house is ruined, business is ruined, people die. We don't know what goes on. We have no idea. Right. And, we have bigger heads than we think we do. Meaning we think we should understand everything and we should get in God's head and really understand how everything works. Yeah, it's very nice. Right. But what does God say to Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu wants to know why things happen the way they do. Right? He wants to understand how God runs the world. What does God say? No one can see my face and live. Nobody. So you'll see me from the back. Right? There's a whole discussion what that means. But you can always see things in hindsight. You can always see things in hindsight. You're not going to understand what you're going through now. Right? We're not going to. Right? But the point over here is if everything's given at Mount Sinai, so why does it say God spoke to Moshe on Mount Sinai here, Mount Sinai there? Why don't you just put it all in one place? You put it all in one place and God said this and that and the other thing, one after another, comma, 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 comma. Right? The Ramban says it's not a contradiction over here. Just because something was given later, right? That's the whole point here. Just because something's given later, a command is given later, that doesn't mean it didn't happen on Mount Sinai. Certainly it happened on Mount Sinai, right? So, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's put in the order that it was, right? That's his point here, right? So therefore it says, so now we mentioned, right, Book of Numbers chapter 7, verse 1, right? That God spoke, at the end of, putting up the Mishkan, and that God spoke of Mount Sinai, right? Leviticus chapter 25, verse 1, right? What's all this to teach you over here, right? So it says, what does the Torah say? Torah says, by the Hashem of Moshe, God spoke to Moshe, Aharon Moshe, after the death of the two sons of Aharon. So says the Ramban, what's going on over here? He says, why does it say Aharon Moshe, after the death of his two sons? Right? We already know that. Didn't that happen before? Didn't it happen in Leviticus chapter 10? We already know that. We already know it's either for a strange fire or they drank wine, whatever the case is. So says the Ramban over here, what's it coming to teach you? Because it was after they died immediately. In other words, we talked before about a lot of different things, what you're allowed to do, not allowed to do in the temple way back when. Right, in the book of Leviticus chapter 10, fine. But now over here, now we're going back. Now we're going back and say, okay, after the death of the sons of Aharon, now we're getting to the point. Now we're getting to the exact point. Now they died right now. And this is what the obligation is in the next verse. We're not going to get through today, but we'll see. We'll see what that command is and what's going on. But this is happening literally right now. They died. This is the end result. This is what you're not allowed to do. And that's why, just like the Medrash says the Rambam, just like the Medrash says that you shouldn't do X action and die like these people died. Right? Just like Rashi said, don't eat cold food and sleep in, a damp place, because, you could die like this person died. Right? And that obviously, you're warning that person more than the first one. And that's why it says the language over here, like Rashi wanted to explain. after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they got too close to God, right? When they drew close over here, don't come at all times you want. Right? Now, the Torah didn't say this before. The Torah gave different explanation. What did the Torah tell me? Either because, first explanation, they brought a strange fire. Second explanation, they drank wine. And then it went on to something else. And the Torah goes on to a totally different thing. It comes along the Torah now, whole different thing over here. Comes along the Torah and says, after they died, now what? Now what? So God gives the command, right? God says to Moshe in the next verse, speak to Aaron. And what are you going to tell him? What are you going to tell Aaron over here? If I find it. You're going to tell Aaron, your brother, don't come anytime you want to the Holy of Holies. That you're not allowed to do. You're only allowed to come once a year. When's that once a year? Yom Kippur. That's the only time you're allowed to come. And that's it. And that's it. So what's the point? You know, they maybe say, okay, we're talking about semantics over here. He's telling you, first of all, just because something was said later doesn't mean the action wasn't now. Right? Now, sorry, even if it's later, it doesn't mean it didn't happen on Mount Sinai. But here he's telling you, this action happened now. Now we're going back. This action happened now, and now there's a warning. Don't go into the Holy of Holies whenever you want. Right? So explains the Ramban. I guess before I go further, someone asked, why do shuls represent today when we don't have the temple? I mean, the question is, what do they represent? Well, we don't have a temple. What went on in the temple? Sacrifices, prayer. Right? Prayer existed even though there was a sacrificial system set up. So if prayer existed, it's not like synagogues all of a sudden, okay, we're going to make up prayers. We're going to say all these different things. Prayer already existed. Then it didn't come out in a vacuum over here. So synagogues, we can't go to there is no temple in Jerusalem, right? We can't go and give sacrifices. But at the same time they gave sacrifices, there's a whole prayer system set up. I mean, it got finalized much later, right? But there was a whole, there were prayers that were given. Some said more, some said less, etc. But eventually it became codified, right? It became solidified. Exactly what we should say, when we should say it, and all that. So now, even in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, there's a Torah scroll. If we find the Ark of the Covenant, right, which is buried underneath the Temple Mount, that's I think where it should be. Right now, if you'd open up that, if we take that Ark, we open it up, we got the same Sefer Torah we have today. Exact same thing. Right now, what do you use the Sefer Torah for? What are you going to use the Sefer Torah for? So way back when, that's what they learned from. They opened it up, they had it on parchment, that's what they learned from. So now we have books, right? Later commentaries, early commentaries, there's plenty what to learn. Then we have the Torah to learn, right? And then Moshe Rabbeinu, and throughout the generations, he learned the oral law, because what are you going to learn for 39 years in the desert? Can't be just the Torah he's giving over. The written word has no definitions. 80% it's all laws without telling me how to do anything. So what's he doing for 39 years? Right? So you tell me, okay, it's going to take a long time to explain all these verses, to 3 million people. Now, if we're talking about the written Torah, we're not talking about oral law. If you're talking about written Torah, the written Torah over here, what? How long is that going to take to memorize? Now, you can tell me, okay, people may not have such great memories, this, that, so fine. Moshe Rabbeinu will train the elders. The elders will go out and they'll take a certain number of groups, of people, and they'll teach them the Torah so they are able to memorize it and they'll pass it down. Right? And they'll pass it down that way. Now, the $1 million question would be, how long is that going to take? How long potentially could that take? It's not going to take 39 years. Maybe it'll take 5 years. Okay, you got 3 million people. I get it. It's a lot of people. So how long can it take? 5 years? 10 years maximum? I mean, the laws are not that, to memorize what the Torah says, I don't think it should take that long. I don't care if there are 3 million people. It shouldn't really take that long. Right? Let's say 10 years. I'll be generous. 10 years. So what is Moshe Rabbeinu teaching them for the next 29 years? Before he dies and they go into the desert. What's he teaching them? It can't be the written law. He's already given it over. He's already telling them what it says, what God said. He has to be explaining what it means. That's what he has to be explaining. Because, they're going to come and say, come on. In Leviticus chapter 24, it speaks about the holidays. And it says you got to sit in a sukkah, in a booth, for 7 days. So they're going to raise their hand, Moshe, what's a booth? Is it a teepee? What is it? Does it have walls? Does it have a roof? Not only that, it says you have to take palm fronds. It says a nice smelling fruit. Now, no one in their right mind, anyone who's ever seen an esrog, is going to think a nice smelling fruit, the Torah says, is a lemon on steroids. No one's going to think that. Why would I think it's a lemon on steroids? Someone thinks it's a quince. Someone thinks it's a pomegranate. Someone thinks maybe it's it's a pineapple. I don't know, a little bit prickly, whatever. Maybe you cut it off, so you don't get you don't get spiked over here. Whatever the case is, no one's gonna think it's a lemon on steroids, for goodness sakes. How do I know what to say? Oh, I got taken in front of God. What does that mean? What does any of this mean? So Moshe Rabbeinu had to explain. He got both Torahs at the same time. And he had to explain to them what it meant. And then throughout the generations, it was supposed to be given over orally. So you had people, different chains, thousands of chains of people memorizing what other people said. The rabbis would go through their learning once a month. Imagine how much they learned. Go over everything they know in a month. Review everything in a month. That's pretty remarkable. We don't like to review in general. We just like to learn new things. Right? But, someone asks us a question, we have to know like the back of our hand. It has to be clear, right? Certainly by men. It's not just, okay, I want to learn something new, whatever. You gotta know what you need to know, clear as day. Sometimes, okay, there are grayer areas, sometimes it can be very gray areas, etc. But there are many things that are black and white. So you have to know what to do. Anyone who's going to go through conversion, you're going to go through a rabbinical court. The base is going to ask you questions. They're going to ask you questions in blessings, potentially. They'll ask you questions in Shabbos, right? They may ask you questions in kashrus. They can ask you questions, from somewhere else you may not even thought of, right? I was in a basin once with somebody, and the basin started asking them questions about being alone with someone of the opposite sex. Is it permitted? Is it not permitted? When is it permitted? What we call yichud, right? Does it apply to family members? It doesn't. Whatever. It's not something a person necessarily learns. It's not part of the curriculum, when it comes to conversion, right? Not part of anyone's curriculum, right? At least not that I know. I could be wrong, right? But it's something that's, why would they ask you that? They want to just see if you ever heard of such a thing. I know of a story. A friend of mine took someone to the rabbinical court, and this person knew everything cold, absolutely cold, right? So what happened? So the rabbinical court started asking them questions about purity and impurity. And the person started to fluster. Asked one question, person couldn't answer. Asked another question, person couldn't answer. Started asking about sacrifices, right? All kinds of different things. Like bam, bam, bam. The person was like getting knocked around. And, before the person seemed like they were going to break, the basin said, okay, you passed. They knew everything cold, what they asked them. But the basin told them, we're gonna set a date for you to convert. We just want you to make sure you don't know everything about Torah. There's always want to learn. Right now, a person can say, oh, come on, that's cruel. Why would they do such a thing? They want to make a point. They want to make a point. There are plenty of things we don't know. Right? A lot of things, we don't know. It's just because a person finished doesn't mean you're finished. Right? It just means, now you start again. Now it's a whole different thing. As people would say, if they finish the entire Talmud, now you go back and really learn. Right? There are different levels, many, many different levels. Right? The person, sort of got off topic here. The purpose is that we don't have we don't have a temple today. Synagogue took that place. There are no sacrifices, right? But the synagogue is a place where we pray, where we learn. Now, the synagogue itself, a person may say, come on, prayer wasn't solidified in the time of the temple. Well, there were people that prayed more, people that prayed less. They got solidified later. That's true. doesn't mean prayer didn't exist, right? So now you needed a place to go. You don't have a temple. You don't have a temple in Jerusalem. That's where most people were situated, right? In the land of Israel. So now you got the destruction of the temple, right? People are thrown out, right? In Babylon and other places. So now what? What are they going to do? How are they going to connect to God? Now, you could tell me in theory, is it really true I need a synagogue to pray in? No, I can pray in my house. I can have a synagogue in my house. I don't need a synagogue in my house. Pray by myself in my house if I really wanted to. Right? I mean, a man's supposed to pray with, 9 other men. As part of a minyan, fine. But technically, do I have to pray in the synagogue? No. Outside my house, there's still, Saturday night, weather permitting, people still pray outside. You're going to say, what? COVID, this, that, that, whatever. It's very convenient. Go outside my parking lot, 10 guys there, not a problem. Other people don't necessarily like to pray there, like to play in a place, whatever. Fine. But is it forbidden? Not forbidden. Now, I would say it might be forbidden. Let's say there's a bad smell there. Let's say people are walking by that are dressed immodestly. Yeah, that might be a problem. But I'm saying you can pray anywhere. But the whole point of a synagogue is what we call a mikdash ma'at, right? It's a small base on mikdash. It's a small temple. I can't give sacrifices, but it takes the place of that, right? It's a fundamental. It's a central place to pray, right? Pray, to learn, etc. Now someone asks, are whiskey and wine allowed? No, they're not allowed for a Kohen before they do the sacrificial, before they bring a sacrifice, before they serve in the temple, they're not allowed to drink. Totally forbidden. Now, here in Israel, the Kohanim bless the congregation every day. Outside of Israel, it's only done on the holidays. Right? Only be done on Sukkot, Shavuot, Passover. Here it's done every day. Now, if a Kohen would drink, before they prayed, seemingly even not that much, they're not allowed to bless the congregation. They also wouldn't be allowed to serve in the temple. Right? We don't have a temple today, but if there would be, if it would be, that what does the Torah tell me? The Torah tells me clear, I'm not allowed to drink. No, sorry, a Kohen who's going to serve in the temple or the tabernacle, whatever it is, they're not allowed to drink. Now, in general, is the person allowed to drink? If they want to, they can. Doesn't mean a person, should get plastered, on a regular basis. We make Kiddush on Shabbos, people make on wine. A lot of people make on wine. Shabbos Day, some people make on scotch. Some people make on whiskey. It's not forbidden, right? Not forbidden. Everyone according to their custom. But even if a person had a shot or two and they were Kohen, they're not serving in the temple. Not allowed to. That's what the Torah says. That's one of the reasons. That is one of the reasons that the 2 sons of Aharon died. Now, you can tell me, well, maybe they didn't drink that much. And even if they didn't, even person, question is how much do they have to drink, right? Probably just a cheekful or more. But you can say back then where wine wasn't diluted, it's much stronger. Okay, but it's very hard to imagine. Very hard to imagine these 2 great people. As great as they were, you want to tell me they walked in the temple plastered? Very hard to understand. Very, very hard to understand. Some ways they're greater than Moshe and Aaron, as we spoke about way back when, without getting into that. So how can we say, they totally got plastered over here? But the point is, not allowed to drink. Person's not allowed to drink and serve in the temple, period. A person shouldn't drink it, before they pray. Or they have these, people have come out very strongly, in the States. I think it's more prevalent in the States than anywhere else. They have a Kiddush club. What's a Kiddush club? Before Musaf, on Shabbos, they make Kiddush. Right? They eat something and they drink. So they come home okay, how you allowed to pray after you? Depends how much you drank, obviously. Right? You shouldn't be allowed to pray after that. Yeah, if you didn't drink that much, okay. Right? But, there are a lot of people, from these things are getting plastered. They come home. They come home and they just stumble home, fall asleep. Whatever, miss many mitzvahs of the day. And rabbis coming out left and right against these things. It's a horrific thing. First of all, what? You can't wait. So either pray a little bit earlier, so at least you can eat, instead of praying so late. Or even if you pray so late, who says you should do this? I mean, it's, you're going to pray the additional service, Musaf, what? You need to drink before. It's not about eating over here. It's not like, oh, it's so ravenous, I can't, I'm starving. It's not about eating. Right? The whole point of making Kiddush is so I'm allowed to eat. But why are they doing this? So they can drink. Right? Scotch, whiskey, wine, whatever. Right? So, many rabbis come out against these things. Right? But, I guess in certain places, hard to shut down. Things are hard to shut down. It's pretty gross if you think about it. This is what you do. Okay, it's a good thing you came to the synagogue. You want to pray. Very good. Right? But what are you doing over here? You're making a desecration of God's name over here. First of all, it's bad enough. You can't wait till the service is over in order to eat and drink. That's bad enough. Right? But now in the middle, that you're going to drink so much and then forget about praying the rest of the service. You're gonzo. Right? And so let's say they're not. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say they're not even plastered. Right? Okay, they're feeling good. Can they still pray? Can they still walk in the straight line? It depends how much they drank. But if they drank too much, certainly not allowed to pray. Right? What's the criteria? Just on this topic, what's the criteria? The criteria is you can't speak in front of a king. Right? I would say, I was at my daughter's engagement on Thursday. So Thursday night. So the other side brought, good amount of scotch, whiskey, other things. So I brought my 2 bottles of wine and whatever, had a couple shots, a little bit of wine. So when I drink a little bit, I get loud. You can't imagine. I get a little bit louder than I normally am. Right. So I was having a good time. So I was like, you were totally plastered. I was like, wasn't plastered. Right. Not in the least. I could have prayed. I could have done all kinds of things. I wouldn't have had an issue. Right? I told people, see, I can still do this with my nose. Right. That means I didn't drink enough. I would hit myself in the face, different issue. Poke myself in the eye, fine. If I was stumbling around, fine. Right. But drinking, what I would consider not very much, fine. Can a person still pray? Yeah. Really, you should get it out of your system, but if you didn't drink that much, it shouldn't be a problem. And if a person really feels maybe it affects them, so good, then you should wait. Then you shouldn't pray. But the criteria is you cannot speak in front of a king. You can't speak in front of a king. Right? That's the criteria. That 100% is the criteria. So some of these people, now again, I'm not taking the survey, so, I can't say for sure. But I guarantee a lot of these people should not pray. And they're probably not because they're plastered already. Take 1 shot, 2 shots, 3 shots on an empty stomach. Right? And they're probably drinking more than that. So if they're on an empty stomach, yeah, they're going to be stumbling around over here. And, people should speak out against it. It's a horrific thing. I don't know why synagogues even allow it. One thing by Kiddush, okay, you already prayed. You have Kiddush, you have wine, you have scotch or whiskey on the table. Someone takes a shot, okay. Takes a couple of shots. Not the end of the world. I mean, they're going to be an alcoholic. No. But if someone's out of control, you got to control yourself over here. But for goodness sakes, before you even finish the service, that's what you're doing. That's a disgrace. That means you can't wait. That's more important than praying. I can't imagine how God's going to react to such a thing. So again, even if you want to tell me, a person didn't drink that much, they could still pray or whatever. Why are you doing it in the middle of the service? For goodness sakes. So wait till afterwards. So you wait another half hour. About how long Musaf takes. Another half hour. 40 minutes. Something like that. Okay. That's the end of the world. No, there's a point. They want to drink. And a lot of these people come home. They don't eat the meals. They're plastered. Right? I've seen a lot written on it recently, and rabbis coming out very strong against it, which they should. I don't, for me, it boggles the mind. Why allow it? You want to make a kiddush afterwards, one thing. You're going to drink a little bit afterward. Okay, nothing wrong with it. But even if you make kiddush afterwards, everyone's around, and you're drinking way too much, of course, that's a problem. It's not rocket science. Over here, people say, nah, it puts me in a good mood. Yeah, but people get way carried away. Way carried away. I always say, even on Purim, if a person drinks, they have to know how to drink. You have to know how to drink. You have to know when to stop. You have to, you have mitzvahs to do. You got a bench, right? You got to say grace after meals. And if you're going to do crazy things, you shouldn't drink, period. Drink within reason. So you got to say, wow, but you drink, you're right. It's fun. I drink before, drink after. Right? It's all part, it's all part of, some people say before you start the meal on Purim, there's no mitzvah to drink. You're right. 100% there's no mitzvah to drink. I agree. Puts me into certain, spirit. So, before I have to pray the afternoon service, I'll stop. 100% I'll stop. Right? Then I'll start again. But that'll be during the meal. That'll be during the meal. So people think, come on, that's overboard. Maybe. Right there, you're right. There's no mitzvah in it. 100% there's no mitzvah in it. But you know what? A couple cups of wine in the morning, make my phone calls on Purim. Different people always regret they answer the phone when I call them. Okay, that's all part of the fun. That's all part of the fun. But if you're doing that every Shabbos, and you can't even wait for the service to end, okay, nichnas yain yoitz soid. When the wine goes in, secrets come out, so you got to be careful. If a person's going to say stupid things and terrible things and forbidden things, can't drink. You have to know there's a limit. There's a limit over here. Someone asks, just read the rabbinical court is not approving any conversions right now. What does that mean? I don't know. It could be COVID issues. Could be they're backed up. They're backlogged. That's what it could mean. Doesn't mean they're going to stop forever. I know COVID shut things down in a major way. They couldn't go to synagogue. So now, you got people getting sick left and right, whether they hold by it or not. So whatever, we're not going there. But, you got a lot of people getting sick. So yeah. So it could be either because of that. Could be because they're also backlogged. Could be totally backlogged. Doesn't mean they're stopping forever. Just means right now, that they're not doing conversions. Could be other reasons. I don't know. Those are two reasons I could think of right now. Someone asks, you have to drink on Purim. No. A person can either drink a little bit more than they normally do. If they don't drink anything until you drink a little bit. Or what you do is you go to sleep. Right? Because the whole point is not to know the difference between Aro Haman and Baruch Mordechai. Right? Cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai. So when a person sleeps, they don't know the difference. Right? A person takes a nap on Purim, they fulfill their obligation that way. And if someone's got a problem with alcohol and they're not allowed to drink, so what do you do? What do you do in such a situation? They're not allowed to drink. Right? I mean, that is the mitzvah of the day, but the halacha is pretty clear. The halacha is if you can't hold your liquor and you're going to do stupid things, you're not allowed to drink. Right? By women, yeah, there are other issues, maybe modesty issues, and all that, but, if a woman wanted to have, a cup of wine on Purim, is she allowed to? Nothing wrong with it. She's to have a cup of beer. Is there a problem with that? No. Does she have to get plastered? Certainly not. Right? Certainly not. Right? But again, it's one of the three things the Talmud says that tests a person. Koso, kaso, and kiso. Koso means his cup, how he drinks, how they speak, right? How they speak, in general. Kaso, how they get angry, if they get angry. And kiso, how they handle, money, how they deal with money. Are they honest in business? That type of thing, right? So, if someone drinks, and again, it has nothing to do with them being an alcoholic or not. They drink. Whenever they have a couple shots, something, they have, a couple cups of wine. Now, what do they start saying? Words of Torah coming out of their mouth. They want to be closer to God. Or are they, making fun of other people, yelling, screaming, this, that? There's a difference, obviously. There's a difference. All right. So somebody like that going to spew all kinds of things they shouldn't. They shouldn't drink. Is there an obligation? Well, it's pretty clear. Certainly for men, there's an obligation. Talmud says clear. Right? Talmud says clear. But, obviously there are, what's the word? There are categories over here. There are levels of what a person should do. All for a guy to fulfill their obligation, all they have to do is drink a little bit more than they normally do. Right? Most Jews are not alcoholics. Most Jews don't drink that much. Some do, okay. There is becoming a problem in the Jewish community, the Orthodox Jewish community. Not saying by everybody, but yeah, people can drink too much. True. Right? But most Jews, they don't drink that much in general. So, if a person doesn't drink that much, then if you drink a little bit more than nothing, so that's it. Then a person takes a nap and you fulfill your obligation according to everybody. Right? But, but it is pretty clear. It is pretty clear according to Jewish law, that's the obligation. The only question is how you handle it and what you do with it. And if you're going to do things that are bad, that are negative, you don't want to. Right? You wouldn't be allowed to. Everything within reason. There are people that just say, oh, it's a mitzvah to get drunk, whatever. And they drink way too much and they miss out on the whole day. Basically, they pass out. And Purim is even greater than Yom Kippur, right? Yom Kippur is Yom Kippurim, a day like Purim. Why? Two opposites. Why? Because Purim is all about, drinking, festivities, eating, all these things. What's Yom Kippur? Just the opposite. Yom Kippur is all about feeling like a piece of dirt, about repentance, about trying to be a better person. But it's much harder. So one explanation is it's much harder to sanctify the physical. It's very easy feeling like a piece of dirt. No one's eating, no one's drinking, you're fasting and all that. Okay, I can put my mindset into that, and sanctify the day. That's a lot easier. You tell me, come on, you're not eating, you're not drinking, you get a headache, this, okay, but you're supposed to feel it. You're supposed to feel like a piece of dirt on this day. Comes along Purim, total opposite. And it's a much harder thing to do. Because if you see someone drink, what comes out of their mouth? Garbage. Right? So now you know what's inside of them. What's really inside of them. Right? As we said before, what does the Talmud tell me? Nichnas yayin yoitz soids. Nichnas yayin, the wine goes in, the secrets come out. Right? So if Torah is coming out, and all they're doing is speaking more words of Torah, want to get more close to their God and all that, so that's a good thing. But if they're saying things they shouldn't say, they're making fun of people, speaking Lashon Hara, doing terrible things, no, then that's forbidden. Right? 100%. 100%. 100% forbidden. Now again, does that mean that a person can have, can't have wine on Shabbos? No. There is a custom between meat and fish. Drink something sharp. Right? Drink something sharp just to make sure there's no taste of meat when you eat fish or vice versa, because it's considered a danger, the Talmud says. What's the danger? I'm not really sure, but it's considered a danger. So we don't eat meat and fish together. So if a person ate fish, you wash off your fork or get another fork and then you can eat meat. But you should wash out your mouth. Either, have bread, have a shot of something, have some wine, whatever. Wash out your mouth so you don't have an issue. Is that a problem? It's not a problem. Right? Totally not a problem. Listen, if someone's taking 2, 3, 4, 5 shots at once, yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. So you say, yeah, but it's not the rabbi doing this. So I'm not going to say what people do. I'm not going to condone what people do. I've seen also people do certain things. They go a little bit haywire. I'm not saying that's a good thing. If they can handle it, they have a strong tolerance, whatever the case is, and they're not going nuts and they're not, saying terrible things and this and that. It's okay. That's how they enjoy themselves. It relaxes them, whatever. Doesn't mean they're an alcoholic, but I do think people get carried away. I don't think there's any question. My daughter's engagement, yeah. People are definitely drinking. No, no question. Did I see people like stumbling out of there? Not that I noticed. People had one shot, maybe a couple shots, whatever. Okay. I'm not, and there are a lot of people didn't drink. It's not an obligation, right? On Shabbos, fine. You should have wine. If you don't like wine, you can have grape juice. So it's not it's not an issue. It's not an issue per se. Do people make it worse than it is? Yeah. Yeah. I was at an engagement party a while ago, probably a month ago. And I saw, I saw things there that, yeah, it was out of control. It was out of control. Some people, let's say, were out of control. I understand they're happy for the guy, whatever. They got engaged, but there's a limit. There's a limit. You got to know how to control yourself. I'm not saying it's forbidden. Person wants to have a couple shots, very good. Want to have I'll enjoy a couple cups of wine. Semi-dry, dry, certainly nothing sweet. No one brings me any sweet wine, I'll break it over your head. I don't enjoy sweet wine, grew up on sweet wine. Right? It's either semi-dry or dry, by me. So okay, that's something I enjoy. Am I sitting there plastered? I'm not plastered. Am I doing it every day? No. Certainly not. Right? Not on a regular basis. So what's the issue? Right? So what's the issue over here? Do people get carried away? Yeah, they do. Is that forbidden? 100%. They'll say things, they'll do things. And if you can't speak in front of God, just keep your mouth shut. Certainly can't pray. You're not allowed to pray if a person drank too much. Yeah, people get carried away. I'm not saying it's not a problem. It's a problem. It's definitely a problem. But you would think, because when it comes to liquor in general, right? We'll say like this, that since it's an obligation to drink wine, unless you don't like wine on Shabbos or a festival. So you can say, shouldn't there be more exponentially, maybe more alcoholics in the Orthodox world? Maybe. Why? You have by Kiddush, you have it by, in between eating meat and fish. Person goes, let's say someone had a baby boy. So Friday night, they have what they call a Shalom Zachar. You go to the house, you eat, you wish mazel tov, you eat some more. They'll put out beer. They'll put out, scotch, whiskey, whatever. Person wants, it's not an issue. The question is how you handle it. So I think there are people who get carried away, but you might think in general, that there should be exponentially a lot more alcoholics in the Jewish community, in the Orthodox community. Now, I'm not saying it's not an issue. We're not going to put it on the table here. I'm not going to say it's not an issue. It's an issue, right? Becoming a bigger issue, right? But that's not a problem with the system. That's not a problem with the obligation. The obligation to drink wine, whatever, we can go into it. Why we sanctify the day with wine. Why we make Havdalah on wine or grape juice, right? And all this about having wine or scotch or whiskey in between meat and fish. Okay, we can have a whole discussion. Does that mean a person's going to be an alcoholic? Doesn't mean that. Doesn't mean that at all. It could be. You'll say a person's more susceptible because there's so much alcohol around. That could be. Very well could be. But percentage-wise, what would I think? Percentage-wise, I certainly might think that the percentage will be much higher, much higher. But it's not. I'm not saying it's not an issue, right? Definitely is an issue. But a person has to know. A person has to know, their limitations and all that. Someone asked, okay, so why did they drink alcohol before the temple service? They didn't know what first of all, they didn't know what the consequences were. They only died after the fact. They weren't given a command before. Only Aharon was given a command after the fact to say, don't drink wine because that's what your two sons died from. So they themselves did not know that. Right? They did not They did not know that, at all. Right? So if they didn't know that, then that's the answer. No, they're not testing fate. They're not testing their evil inclination. They didn't know. You gotta say, how they not know? How they not know? Maybe they felt, you know what? Let's have a cup of wine. Let's have something to drink over here. And it makes them feel totally different. Doesn't make them go out of their minds, think they can walk on water or who knows what. It doesn't mean any of that. Right? It gives them a certain feeling. It makes them feel good. Okay. I'm not saying they're going to drink a lot. Right? I'm just saying, let's say they drank the minimum amount. They drank half a cup of wine. Okay. Does that mean they can't serve? Does that mean they can't do this? They can't do the moonwalk? Right? They're not inebriated over here, per se. They drank. Question is how much. Right? It's not a question of tempting themselves. See, that's the difference between what they did and what Adam did. What did Adam do? Adam understood if the evil inclination was inside of him, that every time he does the right thing exponentially, he gets unbelievable reward. Because he overcame his own evil inclination. If he does the wrong thing, goes against what God wants. So that's goes against what God wants, obviously. And at the base is the body, at the base is the soul. So it's twofold over here. Or it's a catch-22. In other words, if I do the right thing, I go against my evil inclination. So exponentially, I get reward. But if I do the wrong thing exponentially, I get punished. So God says, well, that's a great idea. That's an unbelievable idea. There's only one problem. I didn't create the world for that. Now I have to go to plan B. I have to bring death to the world, which we spoke about. But that being the case, God says you're a heretic. And Adam was the greatest of God's creation. Absolute greatest of God's creation. How can he call him a heretic? How can he call him a heretic? Because he said, I didn't want you to do this. He told him, I wanted you to do what I told you to do. I didn't tell you to do this. You might be right. You might be 100% right that if you do the right thing, exponentially, you raise yourself to a high spiritual level. You do the wrong thing, the base of the body and the soul. It's true. Right? But even if I do the right thing, who says God says I wanted that? That's not what I wanted. That's not what I created the world for. But at the end of the day, that's what you did. Now, God may agree that a person can reach a very high spiritual level that way. Very true. Right? But the repercussion is going to be that much greater if you do something wrong. Well, the bottom line is God told him not to do it. He told him not to do it. So what is he saying? So why does God call Adam a heretic? He calls him a heretic even though he's the greatest of his creation. Calls him a heretic because he went against what he said. And he thought he knew better. Right? And that is a form. I mentioned this last night. I mentioned this last night in my class in Perkei Avos of Ethics of Our Fathers. Right? Someone told me, head of a yeshiva, no doubt, told me when I was leaving, as long as you go to a place that's Zionistic and you do the army, that's the most important thing. Right? And I said, I have plenty of money right now. I can sit and learn for as long as I want. Right? If I can sit and learn as long as I want, why would you stop me from why would you stop me doing the army? Telling me I have a mitzvah to do the army. In other words, we say there's nothing, that the whole point I made was that Torah's life, right? That was the quote over there. Let me just bring it up here. The more Torah, the more life. Right? And we said over there, there's nothing more important than learning Torah. Nothing more important. Comes along this heretic, and this heretic says, no. You know what's more important than learning Torah? What's more important than learning Torah is doing the army. Doing the Israeli army. Now, first of all, you got to tell me and convince me there's an absolute mitzvah to live in Israel. That's the first thing. Right? No, it's only a mitzvah if you can do it. Person may have better livelihood outside of Israel, may learn better outside of Israel, may have other obligations. Not everyone has the merit to live in Israel, first of all. Second, so if you can do it, good. Right? If you can't do it, what? You transgress every second not living in the land? A little bit hard to say. Not only that, now, if you want to tell me it's a mitzvah, that type of mitzvah, you don't do it, you're going to fry in hell forever. Now you're going to show me why, if I live in the land, it's a mitzvah to do the arms. Now, based on that, what would I say? Based on that, I would say if it's a mitzvah to go, if it's a war, everybody goes to fight. One thing, then you got to go fight. Then there's no question. In the time of King David, there was always standing army, but he had plenty of people sitting and learning. Because if you didn't have people sitting and learning, they don't have the divine providence that they need. It's not about the force of my hand, right? It's not koach otzim v'yadi asu et hachayil hazeh, right? The Torah tells me it's the force of my hands, right? It's the power of my hands. Not true. Totally not true, right? We can't think that. We have to put our best foot forward. But God runs the world. God is the one in charge. So if God is the one in charge, you need people to learn. If you don't have people learning, it's not the might of the army. Definitely not the might of the army. And if you look at a number of the wars, they should have been decimated. Totally decimated in so many different ways. How did they survive? How were they successful? Because it was miraculous. God saved them. God took care of the enemy. Right? It doesn't make sense rationally. Totally doesn't make sense rationally. Right? Okay. Right, but for someone to say, I'm going to stunt your growth, and yet you got an opportunity to learn exponentially however long you want, you know what? Doing the army is more important. Don't we say there's nothing more important than learning Torah? What about that? What do we just throw that out the window? Just a nice idea, right? It's more important, you see where this is going? That means if I say Torah is the most important thing, Torah is the most important thing, period. Person has to work, fine. Got to put bread on the table, but you have to have fixed time to learn. That's the only permissibility, not to be learning for a guy, right? He's got to put food on the table, fine. But you have to have fixed times to learn. 100% you have to have fixed times to learn. So if that's the case, what do we say? Why is the person working? Because you have to put bread on the table. That's the bottom line. That's what you have to do, right? If that wasn't the case, and when I'm not working, right, I have to be learning. I should be learning. I have to help out, do some other things, whatever. There are certain things I can push off Torah. We mentioned reading the Megillah. You push it off learning Torah to hear the Megillah. Someone dies, there's no one to bury them. You have to stop learning to do that. There are certain things you stop learning Torah for. The army's not one of them. If it's a mitzvah, you have no choice. It's one thing, right? You're at war, and everyone has to go. Different issue, but that's only by the Sanhedrin. That's only by the Sanhedrin. We're not in a war like that today. You're going to say you need a standing army to protect the land. I agree. Not denying that. 100%. But you need people sitting and learning also. So say you need a balance. You don't need so many people sitting and learning. So I spoke about that last night. Not going to rehash that. I spoke about it last night. But the point is, you cannot say, this person did, essentially. But you cannot say there's something more important than learning Torah when you don't push off Torah. To say that there's something more important than Torah, that's heresy. That's heresy. And thank God I'm not learning under this person. Thank God for that. Who knows where I'd be today? Probably be sometime, some big time, or, non-Orthodox feminist. That's where I'd be, probably. Thank God I'm not. Maybe we're be speaking about me instead of other people. God forbid. Right? But that's heresy. How do you say that's more important? That there's something more important than learning Torah. I get it. If it's something that you have to push off Torah to do, there are cases you push off learning Torah, right? For certain things, fine. But this isn't one of them. You can say, if all people thought that way, what's the percentage? What's the percentage of people 18 years old, that go into the army, that don't do the army? Was it 5%? 7%? Yeah, make it sound like it's like 90%. Like 90% duck the army. In our community, you have people that do the army. Fine. You're right. The vast majority don't. Again, I don't want to really go into it. The whole issue. Why not? right? So they want to say, okay, well, some people learn, not everybody, share the burden. Bottom line is they don't need us either. I had a friend of mine years ago, because of all these Russians that came in, he had to fight his way to get in the army. They didn't want him. You had all these, non-Jewish Russians that came here. They put him in the army. They don't need people. They don't need people. It's a totally different thing today. Well, so whatever, enough said about that. But you can't say that there's something more important than learning Torah. That doesn't exist. 100%. That doesn't exist. Person says such a thing. You got to be very wary. You got to be very wary of anything they'll tell you. For that reason. Because, first of all, it's not true. Second of all, it's heresy. It's absolute heresy. If somebody like that, you can't learn Torah from. You simply cannot learn Torah from. They're going to tell you something more important than that. Come on. Yeah. Any other questions? Before I go a little bit further. All right, so that was the Ramban. Now there's a Kli Yakar. There's a Kli Yakar over here. We'll see how far we get. The Kli Yakar over here says, I got a question. Kli Yakar says, it says, what does the Torah tell me? Torah says by the Bereshit Moshe. Stop. It says God spoke to Moshe. Very good. What did he say? Right, that we asked before. What did he say? That comes on the Kli Yakar, and he says, according to what the first thing that the Torah over here says, where to go? Doesn't mention any command. Doesn't mention anything. It just says God spoke to Moshe. Doesn't tell me anything. Right? And that which Rashi says, what did Rashi say? Remember, Rashi gives a parable. Someone who's sick. Right? And then he says, don't eat cold food and don't sleep in a damp place. The second one, he says, don't eat cold food, don't sleep in a damp place, lest you die like he died. Right? So now, I didn't really ask this question, but this is the Kli Yakar's question. And well, what would be the question on Rashi? What will we say according to what Rashi says? Rashi uses a parable. Right? He uses a parable. So we explained. Right? We explain what the parable was. Right? In other words, after the death of Aaron's two sons, Rashi said, God spoke to Moshe, speak to Aaron your brother, and we know what he said in the second verse. So that he won't die. Right? So it's parallel to what the parable is. Okay. But the question on that really is, does that really answer the question? Right? Comes on the Kli Yakar and he says, I don't get it. He says, it doesn't make sense. The first verse, what does the first verse tell me? First verse tells me, God spoke to Moshe, stop. Right? Then it says, after the death of Aaron's two sons. But what did he command? Normally when we say, by the Bereshit Moshe, Lamor, when God spoke to Moshe saying, he's going to tell him something. Do this, don't do that, eat this, don't eat that. He's going to give us a command. 100% he's going to give us a command. What happened over here? No command. Right? So, says the Kli Yakar, I don't understand Rashi. There's still no command. So what does the parable help? So he says, no, there really is a command. And that's what I would have understood as well. Now, what does the verse 2 say? Right, we'll see verse 2. We're not going to discuss it, but we'll see verse 2. God spoke to Moshe saying, speak to Aaron, your brother. He may not come at all times into the sanctuary. That's what he said. Don't come into the sanctuary anytime you want. That's what he said. Now, you could have said at the beginning, right? You could have said, God spoke to Moshe saying, don't go in anytime you want. Cut out all this other stuff about, his two sons died. Aaron's two sons died and all that. Mention it later. But tell me what he did. Oh, it comes on the Kli Yakar. Right, it comes on the Kli Yakar and he says, I could say like this: the 4 words, Elu b'kravosam v'nei Hashem v'yamusa. That was the command, that he drew close and he died. Right? Their 2 sons came close. They shouldn't have. It was forbidden for them, and they died. That's what it should have said. That was the command. Right? But says the Kli Yakar, no. He says, but that's not what was said over here. He said, God spoke to Moshe these 4 words. Right? And that was included in the first thing he said. Why? Why is that inclusive over here? Because God wanted to show to Moshe, he wanted to explain to Moshe which sin the children of Aaron died. He wanted to explain why they died. So again, grammar-wise, I would say by the Ber Hashem el Moshe, right? I would say God spoke to Moshe. Let's see. God spoke to Moshe. The Ber el Aharon, speak to Aaron, your brother. Don't come anytime you want. Right? That's what I would understand. That's what he wanted to tell him. That's why they died. Therefore, it says Vaydaber. What's the language Vaydaber? Lashon Kasha. Right? He's getting zapped over here. Right? It's not an easy language here. It's a strong language. Strong language over here. That's why he mentions it in the strong language. Because why does he use the strong language? The strong language is Midas Adin. Midas Adin meaning judgment. And then it says, then there's a warning that you shouldn't get burnt by the coals, right? You shouldn't die like this, etc. Shouldn't do this, right? And then it uses a different language. Uses the word Amar, right? Amar is a softer language. So uses a more stronger language in order to say, why did the sons of Aaron die? Right? Then he uses softer language to explain what's going on. Right? They shouldn't get burned, this and that, whatever. And one thing. So, right, that's all within potentially the question of why it only says by the Ber Shem El Moshe, why God spoke to Moshe, let's tell him what he said. Comes along the Kli Yakar and says, okay, let's explain. Let's try and understand. The sons of Aaron were fitting to do what they did, and they were fitting to serve. Right? They were fitting to serve over here. Now, problem is they ate and they drank. Now, even if you tell me they're serving God over here, they're serving God at the highest level, and it was an auspicious time of the tabernacle was being finished, so they wanted to be so close to God, they forgot one thing. Very hard to imagine. They forgot they did something God didn't command. Little thing they forgot over here. They forgot what God said. Right? But the Kli Yakar over here says they ate and they drank. Isn't it true? Normally, before a person does a mitzvah, if it doesn't have to do with food, you don't start eating and then do the mitzvah. It's kind of like saying that's more important than the mitzvah itself. That's the reason persons are not allowed to have breakfast before they daven, before they pray. Right? For a guy, okay, you want to drink tea, you want to drink coffee, you're allowed to do that, but you shouldn't add anything sweet. Why? Because he added something sweet, it's like a delicacy. You gotta tell me, come on, sugar doesn't cost that much, not a delicacy. No, but it's something sweet. So you're showing, I want to satisfy my stomach, so to speak, that's more important than praying. So you're going to say, come on, that's not what I'm saying. I can't drink coffee straight. I don't drink coffee at all, but, you can't drink coffee straight. Some people. So you're going to say, why is that? In other words, why can't I add cream? Or why can't I add sugar over here? Because you're saying this sweet thing is more important than prayer. Am I allowed to drink coffee or tea? Yes. I'm allowed to drink it before I pray, 100%. Am I allowed to eat? No. I'm not allowed to eat. I have to wait till after I pray. Now, let's say by a woman, it's a little bit different. So let's say a woman says blessings over the Torah in the morning, and then she says the morning blessings. She can eat at that point. She's allowed to eat, then go back and pray. Now, why? Because she doesn't really have an obligation to pray. Even if she has an obligation once a day to pray. Right? Some say it's twice a day. Others say it's once a day. Whatever the case is, she has an obligation, let's say at the very least, pray once a day. Does she have the same obligation as a man? No. Because it's a mitzvah bound by time. If she wants to join, go to a synagogue when they pray in the morning, is she allowed to? Yeah, she's allowed to. Is she obligated? She's not obligated. Right? So if she wanted to say the morning blessings and then eat something, feel stronger or whatever, fine. A guy doesn't have that luxury. Doesn't have that luxury. Right? So over here, what do? They put their hand, this is his language, they put their hand on food and drink. And then they saw God. Either you tell me putting your hand on food and drink is more important than seeing God, or it's all part of the same thing. Right? Because he says, because they looked at God's presence in a heart full of joy. Right? Or let's say better, in a heart full of food and drink. In other words, they're going out of their mind. They want to be so close to God over here. They want to be unbelievably close to God. It's an auspicious time. So we all understand that. But what are they doing? What are they doing? They're eating and drinking and doing that. They're showing that's equivalent to seeing God's presence. Or they'll say that's part and parcel of the same thing. And God says, you're having a donut. You're having a donut and you're drinking, and you want to see me face to face. Now, again, they're on a high spiritual level. So, it's a little bit hard to understand. But what essentially they're saying is, I'm going to eat and drink and I'm going to see God's presence. And God says, no, you're not. That's a little bit too much. So God waited because the temple was being erected, the tabernacle is being erected, it's being put up, so God didn't take them right away. But he said that's too far. That 100% is too far. Eating and drinking and trying to see my presence, no, that's too much. So God didn't take them straight away. He should have taken them straight away. God had mercy. He had mercy, he didn't want to do that. So that's why it's a command to Aharon, don't come into the Holy of Holies whenever you want. And not only that, don't come into the holies when you've eaten and drunk and you've had something to drink. Because you're only allowed to go in there on Yom Kippur. Very interesting. Why is he allowed to go there on Yom Kippur? Okay, you tell me that's a direct command. Very good. Right? But what do we do on Yom Kippur? We don't eat, we don't drink. So there's a correspondence over here. Right? In other words, the whole fact that God says, fine, you want to go into the Holy of Holies, very good. You can only do that once a year. When is that? When's that time? Yom Kippur. What do we do on Yom Kippur? We fast. You don't eat or drink in the Holy of Holies. Right? And that's a command to him. Because a person on Yom Kippur, right, they have to punish the body to a certain extent. They have to fast. Right? They have to fast over here. They have to show humility, subservience in front of their creator. Subservience means on an empty stomach. You're not eating over here. Right? That's how you show subservience. So therefore, God, what did God say? God says to Moshe, I'm going to tell you the reason why the sons of Aaron died first, in order that I can get on to the second command of don't come anytime you want. Right? First of all, God says, the sons of Aaron died. And then God's going to tell you why. God's going to go through the whole reason why. Right? And that's why the Torah says God spoke to Moshe after the sons of Aaron died. And what did they do to die? They became too close to God, and God took them. They went in too far. They shouldn't have gone in. Right? They died because they came too close when God said not to. It wasn't a fitting time. Right? It wasn't a fitting time to see God. But they thought they knew better. They thought it was an auspicious time. And even though it's an auspicious time, you got to remember one thing. And the one thing is, you don't do what you think is right. You got to do what God thinks is right. We're not reinventing the wheel. That's the punishment of Adam, of Adam and Eve. And that's why there's death in the world. Because God could say, Adam, I agree with you. Eating from the tree, putting the evil inclination inside, it does have a positive effect if you do the right thing. And you get reward exponentially. That is all true. But what did God say? God said, don't eat from the tree. So you think you know better than me. And there are a lot of people in this world today think they know better than God. You take the Reform movement, conservative movement, they change all kinds of things, open Orthodoxy, whatever you want to call them. They change all these different things. And guess what? It doesn't work. It's a fossil. You can't pass it down. So you're going to see, no, I'm going to add this. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to make it, for the 21st century. We're going to bring more people to synagogue. You're not. Because all those synagogues are dying. They're all dying left and right. So they're trying to reinvent the wheel. They say, God, you tried this, it doesn't work. Torah doesn't speak to me because you don't want to learn it. You got your own agenda. There are a million reasons why. Right? But what are you going to tell me? You're going to tell me I know better. I know better. Right now, let's say, for argument's sake, which is not true, but let's say I would agree. Let's say doing all these innovations, I would agree. Count women, gay rabbis, other things, not a problem. Take out different parts of the Torah. I could, in theory, not true. I could, in theory, say that's okay. All right, but what's the end result? Is the end result you're really bringing more people to synagogue? No. All these synagogues are dying. They're all dying. Just a matter of when. A friend of my father's once said, a number of years ago, you tell your son in Israel, this synagogue's never going to die. Yeah, it's going to die. And I was pretty clear it's going to die because the average age of the synagogue is about 75. So eventually it's going to die. 2 years later, it died. Prophecy, right? Unbelievable. You can make any innovation you want. If it doesn't stick and it doesn't pass down, it doesn't work. People say it doesn't matter. It was a good try. I want to do it anyway. So what? Some people make the excuse I mentioned last night. My class on Pirkei Avos. Some people will say, why our synagogue lost 60% in the last 20 years, last 30 years. Why do we lose, 40%? Because the dues are too high. Paying dues to belong to synagogue are too high. Maybe they are too high. Okay. That's why people aren't staying. And if let's say they slashed the dues by 30%, 40%, people still wouldn't come. Maybe some would stay. The vast majority are not going to stay. And if they did stay, it doesn't really mean a whole lot anyway. But that's not what the reason is. The reason is the parents don't believe in it, the kids don't believe in it. So why are they going to belong to it? All right, tell me. Let's give an excuse. We're going to say because it's too expensive. Well, that's a good excuse. Maybe it is too expensive. That's not why they're not coming. They're not coming because they don't believe in it. They make it a travesty of a mockery of shame. That's the reason. That's totally the reason. So here, so that's the point. So that is exactly the point here, is that we can't reinvent the wheel. Now, the problem is we're talking about two of potentially the greatest people in the history of man, the sons of Aharon. Can't imagine who they were. Can't imagine how holy they were. So it's very, very hard to understand how they thought that they know better than God. Very hard to understand. We can understand it in one way, probably many ways. One way is that it was a very, very auspicious time. They're building the tabernacle. It's just about done. God's presence is going to come down. It's an unbelievable time. They're going out of their souls. They're going out of their minds. Unbelievable holiness. Unbelievable holiness. They say, let's go in the Holy of Holies. This is such an auspicious time. Let's go see God face to face. Forget they ate and they drank. Forget even about that. They did it for the sake of heaven, not because they want to be brazen. They did it because it was such an unbelievable time. It's an auspicious time. But God said, don't do it. God didn't want them to do it. Because they did something they weren't commanded to do. Even for the sake of heaven. So we may think, God forbid, we may think, we'll cut corners. We'll do things maybe, we shouldn't do or whatever, but we'll justify it. I'll give an example. Right? We mentioned this before. You look at what King Saul did in Samuel 1. You look over there, Samuel the prophet gives him a command from God. Prophecy. Wipe out all of Amalek. All of them, men, women, children, oxen, everybody, wipe them out. He leaves the king alive, spare the women, and he keeps the oxen around, the best of them, in order to sacrifice. Now, let's ask a very simple question. The very simple question is, and we don't understand who King Saul was either, and what he was doing, trying to kill King David and all that. But how in the world did he think he fulfilled his obligation, what God said? And how do you go against what Samuel the prophet said? Very, very hard to understand. If you're telling me, he's not as great, he's a fool, he did whatever he wanted. He's the first king of the Jewish people. Fitting to be king. Fitting to be king. So when we read Tanakh, as we mentioned many times, you have to look beyond what's going on at face value. You have to see what the commentaries say, because this doesn't make sense. And then comes along Samuel the prophet, chastises him. And that's when King Saul realizes he did something wrong. Up until that point, he didn't think he did anything wrong. Right, then the king shacks up with somebody, and the offspring of that is Haman. Right, generations later. Right? It's very hard to understand. Even tell me he's a fool. He doesn't really care. He has no fear of heaven. God forbid. And he's doing whatever he wants anyway. Fine. That I can hear. But if he's on a certain spiritual level, at a very high level, and he's given a command by a prophet himself, and he understands his prophecy as well does as Samuel the prophet, how can he say, I'm not going to do it? Forget not going to do it. That was with Jonah. You read the book of Jonah. He didn't want to go do what God said. Right? Here, he thought he did the right thing. He's not brazen. He's thinking he's doing the right thing. Very hard to understand. Korach being jealous of Moshe Rabbeinu, another example. Killed him. Because everything Moshe did, God told him to do. He didn't do it on his own. Jealousy destroyed him. But don't you understand? Korach was one of the 20% came out of Egypt. Korach was one of the people who held the ark and didn't die. Wasn't a fool by any stretch. What do you see? Jealousy killed him. Totally killed him. Do we understand who Korach was? Very hard to understand. A lot of these things at face value, very hard to understand. But we do at our level, we have to try and make some level of sense. We have to try and understand it. But certainly at face value, very hard. So you take Nadav and Avihu, right? Just look, at face value, they drank wine where they weren't supposed to, and they brought this incense in the Holy of Holies they weren't supposed to, right? They thought they knew better. They're going to say, well, what about us? What are they going to say about us? So now we're learning. We're learning what's permissible, what's forbidden. So first of all, we'll say, well, now we know better, okay? Does that stop a person from sinning? Doesn't necessarily stop a person from sinning. Now they're more aware. Now they understand, right? They understand at a higher level. Makes more sense, right? Totally makes more sense. But at the same time, doesn't make us perfect. Not at all. Doesn't stop us from sinning. But now we have a higher reality. So you say it's catch-22. The more I know, the more I'm liable for. True. That 100% is true. Right, but now everything we do has more meaning. I do the right thing, draws me closer. I do the wrong thing, draws me further away. But every last thing has repercussions. So would I rather live in a world of fantasy? People like fantasy. Fantasy sells in a major way. So people like fantasy. If a person wants to have real meaning in life, this is what we're doing. This is what we're learning. That's the whole purpose. Doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't necessarily mean it's easy. Doesn't mean there aren't challenges. Right? Half the battle, I would say, 3/4 of the battle is knowing what to do and understanding why we do it. Then you got to go out and do it. It's a lot harder. You know, a person can be battle ready and not have his gear on. And then you go out, you get slaughtered. Right? You get slaughtered. So we got to be prepared. You got to know what to do. You got to understand to the best of our ability why we do it. And then you got to do it. No matter if you don't understand it fully or not. Still have to do it. Right? That's our obligation. That's what we're created to do. Right? The mission Pirkei Avos says, don't think you're so great. You keep Torah and mitzvahs. Isn't that what you're created to do? That's what you're created to do. Forget about reward. That's what you're created to do. Finished. No ifs, ands, or buts. No, but I'm going to do it this. I'm going to do that. This is what my mind tells. Who cares what your mind says? Don't care what my mind says. Nobody cares. God certainly doesn't care. Question is it permissible according to Torah or not? Am I allowed to do this? Not allowed to do this? Does it draw me closer to God or not? That's the question. And if it's dicey, a little bit dicey, and we're not sure, then you probably shouldn't do it. All right? It's probably negative. Right? Could be negative. So a person has the question, not, whether it's a good thing or not. First of all, you have to ask, your local Orthodox rabbi what to do. Right? It probably is a better thing not to do it. Right? There are certain things that if we think about it, say, well, is this going to be better for me in serving God or not? And there's a lot of things that are black and white. They're pretty black and white. Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll say no. But, there are gray areas. Not going to say not. There are gray areas. Okay. But even if there are gray areas. So if we're not sure, so we should ask before we do it. Because otherwise, it's going to have a negative effect. Totally negative effect. There's a lot more here in this Kliyaka, but I'm going to stop there, and then whatever. There's a lot more to see on this as well. Yeah, I'll take any other questions. Anyone have any questions on anything brought up tonight, or any take any general questions? All right, there are no questions. I'm going to sign out. I just every Sunday, 4 o'clock Israel time, 9 o'clock Eastern time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Chaim Kaufman, or Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism. You can send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com. We're going to have Tanakh Talk in about an hour and 20 minutes. Controversial issues. Going to put that up shortly. And then Noahide Nations, 2:30 Eastern time, 9:30 Israel time. So again, anyone has any questions, find me there. Otherwise, I'm going to sign out and wish everyone a good beginning of the day.